Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace again. I'm just going to continue this video about Napoleon again in case it helps you. Just keep in mind that we do see, this is a map at a particular point in time. If you have read a little bit of some of the sources, especially the Hunt source toward the end, and you see a little bit of reference to the Napoleonic Wars, keep in mind that's kind of a larger frame around the time that Napoleon starts his rule. We start to see military escalation. Some of this is because other countries declare war on France. Sometimes this is more of an aggressive kind of role by Napoleon, but the Napoleonic Wars largely push France against some other powers, often referred to as the coalition powers. And so the war of the First Coalition, Second Coalition, Third Coalition, it's really the war after the Second Coalition that we see Napoleon's and the Napoleonic Wars really take off. Quite a few of the wars of like the second, third, fourth, coalitions, we see significant attempts for other societies like Prussia or Russia or Austria or Britain to try to take down Napoleon's France. And oftentimes this will backfire by the end, and Napoleon is fairly successful. And after the various coalition wars, there tends to be some type of peace agreement. In some cases, Napoleon has gains from those peace agreements, such as like land from Austria or land from Prussia. But over the course of time, and as Napoleon's kind of range starts to increase, he makes several mistakes, and we can kind of note the closer he gets to 1812, the size of his empire makes it very, very difficult to have him kind of be present in a variety of places. So that ends up being, kind of significant. Okay. You can see in this case, we have some places that are independent. Okay. Portugal was generally allied with Britain. Britain is largely a coalition power that is antagonistic with France. There's times when there's peace, but largely Britain is on the other side of France. You also can see in the green the Ottoman Empire, that is largely a space Napoleon had been involved in Egypt prior to his coup, but the Ottoman Empire is not really dominated at this time, although the Napoleonic Wars arguably create some changes within the Ottoman Empire. It's an effect of the Napoleonic Wars. In terms of this map, countries that might be allied with Napoleon, that is something that is quite maybe limited in terms of time. There is a frame where that occurs, and there is an alliance, Prussia and Austria, that is not going to last, however, and ultimately we're going to see Austria and France especially go toe-to-toe quite a bit, and Austria oftentimes on the losing side. Eventually, Napoleon will marry the daughter of the Austrian monarch, and that is a time where they actually have an alliance. So that's just a small part of the larger Napoleonic Wars. The Confederation of the Rhine, I think, is useful to note because it does replace what was in place for a long time, which was the Holy Roman Empire. And that's something that comes about with France's, once France is successful in wars against Austria, what ends up happening is the loss of land, which was the Holy Roman Empire. And so this Confederation of the Rhine changes up the area that we would today call Germany, because, and it's other areas too, but this consolidates a great deal of very small kingdoms into something that becomes like a coalition of places that is, ultimately going to consolidate in the 1800s under Bismarck, into something that will be recognizable around the time, just before World War I and like the late 1800s, as Germany. Okay. But in any case, let's look at some of the military components of this. Lots and lots of references to Napoleon being somewhat a military mastermind, especially before 1812. He has quite successful battles. And some things in general, just to note about Napoleon, he had, some interesting techniques. First of all, he had a very, very large army. The French, during the French Revolution, start conscription, and the French army becomes, massive. And so Napoleon's grand army dominates in a lot of ways because of the way he organizes some of the army. He kind of has these like little mini armies, that he establishes in different geographic spaces, and they kind of work in concert, and they have quite a bit of expertise. So he's not just like leading one, group. There are many, many groups of his, military. He also is known for using artillery in very, very sophisticated ways, masterminding, ways and directions for artillery fire. He used speed so he could really traverse land. He is not going to be filled with a naval superiority that's going to go to Britain, but on land, Napoleon had the ability to use speed and surprise. Some of that becomes really important in some of his campaigns. He had this idea of a mobile artillery, and his men oftentimes were very loyal to him, something that he invested a great deal of energy into. And so there's that aspect of his, military might. And he also traveled quickly with the notion that there would be very few supplies. He had his very large army basically live off the land. So when Napoleon's army was in town, there was a great deal of resources that might get depleted because Napoleon's army was using those resources. And he traveled, light as a result, so he could move faster because his army, lived off the land. One of the things that will catch Napoleon at the end of his military campaigns in Russia will largely be, that he will not be able to live off the land because the Russians will burn the city of Moscow to the ground, and there will be no, living off the land. So those are some things, about Napoleon. There was a map that you had and some questions on the map, in particular about the significance of the Battle of Trafalgar. This becomes important because, for a couple of reasons, Napoleon had tried to ally with Spain. Spain was, for some time a little bit of an ally, and Napoleon's troops were supporting Spanish troops, so there was like a Spanish fleet. And, England, which really had the capability in the seas, was really able to destroy the Spanish fleet. This became really significant because it largely ended any opportunity Napoleon would have had to campaign directly in Britain. There's always this like earlier part of the Napoleonic Wars where France and Britain oppose each other. There's a short amount of peace, but then they oppose each other again. And there's this sense that Napoleon's going to kind of host this master campaign, and go right to England. And that becomes, notably not something that's possible after the Battle of Trafalgar. There are other battles that are very significant. The Battle of Borodino, the Battle of Marengo, Austerlitz. There are many battles, so I'm just going to note these two, and you can see some of the kind of commonalities between these. In 1805 and 1806, this is a time when Napoleon is beating back coalition forces. The Battle of Austerlitz is a massive campaign. Napoleon invades Austria, forces the emperor to make peace, and forms an alliance, forces an alliance, and Napoleon also becomes the king of Italy. This is essentially, kind of how the Battle of Austerlitz ends. It's a massive invasion and takedown of Austria. The Battle of Jena, very, very similar, about a year later, an invasion of Prussia, forces the king to make a peace and forces an alliance. So you can kind of see a pattern in 1805 and 1806. In the Battle of Friedland, this becomes significant because this is related to, Prussia and Russia, who had thought that maybe they could fight together and beat Napoleon. The Battle of Friedland is fought in East Prussia. It is against Russia. It's a very large win for Napoleon. And because of Napoleon's efforts and some of the push that Germans do in East Prussia, there's a great deal of nationalism that starts to become an effect. So where Napoleon goes and bringing the Napoleonic Wars and bringing the Napoleonic Code, sometimes the response is a great deal of nationalism. And that's particularly important in Germany because there really hadn't been a great deal of nationalism. There really wasn't this sense that, German culture was this like unique thing because there were many groups of people who lived in these kind of principalities. But we also see Prussia, even though Prussia will get creamed by Napoleon, we do see Prussia kind of respond to the Napoleonic Wars, in a way to end serfdom, military reforms. There's a great deal of things that start to shift, even though, East Prussia, is going to be maintained. We see Prussia start to make some changes. There is a treaty that ultimately does take part of Prussia and give it away. So Napoleon gets half of the western half of Prussia, and he's going to deal with Tsar Alexander the First. That he's going to take all of Europe, and Alex the First can basically have the Ottoman Empire, and Alex the First can have the eastern half of Prussia. So Prussia gets really thrown under the bus, and Napoleon and Russia will basically sell off parts of Prussia. For a while, there's a non-aggression pact. Prussia is going to lose much of its land, but it kind of creates some peace between Russia and France. This is another image of Napoleon's Europe, the French Empire, places that are controlled by Napoleon. Napoleon had invaded Spain in an effort to try to get to Portugal. Portugal was not playing by some of Napoleon's rules, and he tries to make Portugal do so. On the way there, he finds himself in Spain, so that becomes important, okay? And in this effort, we also see Napoleon appoint several of his brothers to thrones. Some of you noted this. This is not something he does on day one of his rule, but by like 1907, 1908, we start to see this takeover of new places, and family members, kind of become puppets of Napoleon in different places. He does make mistakes, so let's kind of see if we can just use these last few minutes to talk about some of the mistakes. Historians might recognize that the continental system is an attempt to try to have economic warfare with Britain, to basically blockade Britain from the rest of Europe so that British ships could not trade at all with European countries. Any country that was kind of allied or connected to Napoleon wasn't allowed to trade. And this included Russia, and this included Spain and Portugal, whichever. And one by one, some countries find it very economically problematic. So, was Britain hurt by the continental system? Yes. They also will do the same thing back to Napoleon, and they'll go trade with the Americas. But a lot of European countries will miss out on British trade, and they're upset. So they start to walk away from the continental system. Portugal does. That's why we see Napoleon run through Spain to get to Portugal to force it to comply with the continental system. And there is also battles in Russia to try to get Russia to comply with the continental system. So it's an attempted blockade of Great Britain that largely fails, although it does have some teeth. There's also attempts to stop French ships. And if you're familiar with the War of 1812 and impressment of sailors and all of those things, that's connected to the Napoleonic Wars. The Peninsular War with Spain ends up being a very significant mistake, and it lasts for a long time. Think of it as like Napoleon's, kind of going into Spain, and he can't really get out. Napoleon is not always the one doing the fighting, his troops are, but Spain has a great deal of guerrilla warfare where they come at Napoleon's army, and Napoleon is fairly surprised. This is some individuals who see France as anti-Catholic, supporting something that they don't want. And Napoleon had ousted the Spanish monarch, and ultimately put in place his brother. He thought that the monarch was unpopular and that people in Spain might be happy about this. Well, they're not. And the artwork, the 3rd of May is, where we see the French army, massacring members of these Spanish, guerrilla fighters. That becomes a horrifically messy war that never really